Okay. Yes, hit record. And it's recording. We did the Pledge of Allegiance for the record. Okay, Arthur O'Neill's not here for a report. We'll move on to D, reports. Any questions? Seeing none, announcements and correspondence. And then we'll move on to the consent agenda. Are there any questions on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second? George Bertram has seconded it. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And it carries. Thank you. Bids and procurements are in front of you. On the Valentine Pavilion and the fire department repair. Can we talk on the bids? Let me get this out here.
I think the pavilion's a no-brainer.
Yeah, that's 35 years. I don't think it's really been touched. We did transfer the money, and I'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
I'll second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to mention, because I got a question after the last meeting, and just so for the benefit of everyone here to understand, on the town website, there is a tabulation sheet in accordance with our bid procurement policy. There is a recommendation from the department head, and all of us have it in front of us here tonight in full compliance with our bid procurement policy.
Okay. Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and it carries. The other thing is the fire department repair, rust repair to Rescue 1 and Engine 6. They did comply with the bid policy. Any questions on it?
I just wondered why the large discrepancy in the second vehicle, if anybody knew. I mean, just
On the second vehicle? Probably
Between the two
because,
bids.
do you mean because of Engine 6 okay, because we did one fire truck before that was more money, which was similar to the Engine 6.
I was just curious why it was a significant difference. I mean, I understand why they're recommending this bidder, but I just wondered why.
Oh, that's just their bid. I don't know why it would be. We go out to bid, they don't tell us why. It is kind of a difficult situation because they do take these trucks apart, and on the last one, I think it was Engine 5, they took apart, and there was a subframe that had to be ordered that they couldn't see.
Also, I think Dan's here.
Yeah, if Dan knows. Do you know Dan?
Dan is here, yeah. Dan, would you like to explain that?
Thank you.
How are you come you're here? Oh.
What a coincidence. The discrepancy in the two bids for the second vehicle.
Between
Engine
New England,
6.
gallons a night and between New England Fire Equipment?
Just curious as to any
What,
reason why.
why it was Engine 6, especially on Engine 6? Is there any explanation?
As far,
There was a $13,000 discrepancy between the two bids. Was there any difference in the bids?
I think because they have to remove the pump and the tank as well, and I think that costs more. Was that one more or less? I can't
Yeah,
remember.
the Engine 6 was more.
Yeah, because they
But-
have to remove the tank as well.
But they came in right pretty close for the first one.
On the rescue on
Right.
both vendors was 27,840 and 27,875. New England Fire Equipment. New England Fire Equipment came in at 38,204. Gallons a night on Engine 6 came in at 25,810. So I think Selectman Naylor is asking, is there a reason why that discrepancy in that?
Do you know why?
Do you know?
I'm
Okay.
not sure exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's fine.
just the bid. Okay, thank you.
But I guess it wasn't enough to make a recommendation the other way. So.
There you go.
One question I just have regarding this. Was this an unanticipated expense? Is it regular?
No, this was in the budget,
Budget.
was discussed at the last budget about getting these trucks. And the reason for this is to, we all know about the corrosion that's going on. but it extends, Dan, what was the life expectancy to extend like some number of years?
Yeah, like 5 years for these two trucks,
Right,
another 5 years, I think.
another 5 years. So the expense of a new truck was so much that the fire department has many times tried to refurbish our trucks if it warranted it. I know when I was on the fire department, we did. They always looked at that, and I do appreciate the fire department. There's some of our firemen are in here doing that. So I have a motion and seconded on the floor. Thank you, Dan. Call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? And it carries. No motion? We don't have a motion.
I'll make the motion,
Second.
and I still
Would you
say
like to
aye.
second it?
Aye.
Second it. We got it? I'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and it carries. Thank you. Okay. Transfers. Ooh, did I miss something?
Yeah.
No,
You're good.
transfers.
You're good.
We're transferring money from the pool liner came in for less money. The pavilion capital was higher, and we're transferring from one to the other in order to take care of these projects. Any questions on that?
So these are not incremental, these were pre-approved, just been transferred from one to the other. Great.
And overall, it looks like we're still below budget.
Yes.
for the
But when they
project, so.
originally asked for the request for the pavilion, they asked for 80,000, and we only gave them 60, and it turns out they need closer to the 80. So maybe we should listen a little bit better.
We made up for it on the
There you
budget.
go.
Okay. Resolve the town, Southbury Board of Selectmen hereby concurs with the Board of Finance and approves the following transfer. Number 18-01 Park and Recreation from Capital Pool Liner for 16 to Capital Pavilion, 16,000 to transfer the additional funds needed to complete the project.
So moved.
I'll second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, and it carries. Minutes of the last meeting,
Motion to approve?
I'll second.
made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Carries. Okay. Unfinished business. Democratic Town Committee request for a gun ordinance. We ran out of time on the last meetings to discuss it. Mike? You want to discuss the,
I'd love to.
go ahead.
Thanks, everybody, for showing up again tonight. So I have some prepared remarks, but I want to just talk quickly about the last meeting. Last meeting was an emotional meeting. There were a lot of voices, a lot of people. It's a piece of me that, while I love being in a big room, I look forward to returning to Town Hall. But I do love the engagement of the community. I still wish that we can hear from more Southbury residents. While we did hear from a good amount of Southbury residents in public comments last time on both sides of the issue, certainly the majority of overall correspondence we've gotten were a lot of out-of-town voices. So I'm still eager to hear from a higher percentage of Southbury residents than we have, and hope we can continue this discussion. I don't expect, and I hope today's meeting isn't anticlimactic, because I would be incredibly surprised and extraordinarily disappointed if we're voting on anything tonight. In our first conversation, this is an issue that requires meaningful and deliberative debate, a process that we need to talk about. Clearly, we've heard from some residents, but I think we've barely scratched the surface, frankly, on the discussion, and I don't think we should be rushing to any judgments. A lot of people spoke at our last meeting, and none, I believe at least, would be considered expert witnesses, nor would myself, and I looked at my lawyer friend to the right. But I wanted to clarify some factual errors that I think were shared with the public. There's a lot of conversation and debate that's been made about gun-free zones. And it started with, I think what was a misrepresentation of what the original request for us was. There was never a request for, you see headlines, for a town-wide ban on guns. Never a request. There were concerns in public comments about, what if I'm driving on a road, I'm suddenly going to get arrested? An over-exaggeration, in my opinion, of what the request was. And again, it was a request that we consider an ordinance, which we then discovered there happened to be one. So I prepared some remarks I want to go through, and then I'm looking forward to us having a real meaningful conversation. So I don't think this is a new idea. And I think we learned that in our process when we uncovered the 81 ordinance, for sure. So I don't believe we're setting any precedents in Southbury. Ordinances such as the one we've been asked to consider not only exist in Southbury, but exist in all 50 states, including in municipalities right in around us. 6 towns, and we've talked about it, and I don't want to overbear. We were here till 10:30 last night. No need to. Last time, we don't need to be here that long. But we're really not looking to create something new in Southbury. I don't think that's the request. For more than 35 years, since 81, when it was passed under First Selectman Mike Kenny, a Republican, and a majority Republican board, this isn't a political issue. It wasn't then. It shouldn't be now. This is a public safety and First and Second Amendment issue. That's really what it comes down to. But back then, and there was coverage in the paper recently about it for some members of that board who were able to be contacted, and it was no big deal. And I'm paraphrasing some of the quotes that were in the story, but the conversation was, it was no big deal. It just made good sense. That was what the conversation was. So I think I still have a lot of questions, and I appreciate Betsy and Noreen and others in Town Hall and in the First Selectman's office who helped pull minutes from then, who have looked back on minutes prior to then. Selectman Bucksbaum had put in a request earlier today for some more information, which we got a few hours ago. But I still have questions about what led to the passing of that ordinance in 1981. It doesn't seem like it was in response to anything that happened. It just seemed like, and from some of the comments that have been made publicly, that it was just common sense. If this, has it ever been enforced? When it first was put into place, we heard from Sergeant Van Ness last time that really there hasn't been much enforcement. There's some ambiguity in the language that he explained last time. But back when it was first passed, was it enforced? I'd like to see if we can go back into the history books and find a little bit more about that. And finally, I'd have to ask, where was everyone way back then? Where was the outrage and the passion we see today on both sides of this issue? And I think that goes to, a cultural change that's affected Southbury and affected Connecticut, affected our nation. So many of the emails certainly that we received, many comments that were expressed 2 weeks ago, concerned the ordinance infringing upon Second Amendment rights. But I honestly don't believe there are issues related to the Second Amendment. And as I said at our last meeting, like some who were here last time, I too carry a copy of the Constitution wherever I go. It's in my work bag. I consider myself a constitutionalist. I believe in it and I cherish it. It's one of the most amazing documents of all our time. But I don't believe that it is. Like I said, that notion of it not being related to the Second Amendment has been supported all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Because this isn't a new idea that's been proposed. Legal restrictions in certain sensitive places have been put into place all over the country. We're not trying to break new ground here. In D.C. versus Heller, which is the landmark Supreme Court decision, it recognized in 2008 that the Second Amendment protects the right of law-abiding, responsible citizens to use arms in defense of hearth and home. And while it did not address possession in public spaces, in writing the majority opinion for the court, the late Justice Antonin Scalia, who is among the most conservative jurists in the history of the Supreme Court, wrote, quote, "Like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited, and it is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose." Writing for the 5-4 court majority, Justice Scalia emphasized that, quote, "Nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places, such as schools." A few years ago, Justice Samuel Alito, another conservative jurist, affirmed this position in ruling on another case. This decision reaffirmed a prior Supreme Court decision from 1886 Presser versus Illinois, which, quote, held that the right to keep and bear arms was not violated by a law that forbade bodies of men to associate together as military organizations or to drill or parade with arms in cities and towns unless authorized by law. The courts are clear that the town would be in its legal rights. And I believe in the spirit of words that were shared with us in letters submitted by Father Joe Donnelly and by Rabbi Polikoff, that we would also be exercising not only our legal right, but our moral responsibility to prohibit the possession of firearms and other weapons in clearly defined town property and spaces in the interest of the common good. So to me, this debate can't lose focus on really where it started, and it started right after Charlottesville. This is really a focus on the First Amendment, namely the right to peaceable assembly. Among the ideas we might consider to protect the First Amendment would be to expressly prohibit the carrying of guns at demonstrations on public or town property. There are ways I think we can get there while protecting First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights. Doing so would, in large part, respond to some of the concerns put forth by the request from the Southbury Democratic Town Committee, as their suggestion was motivated by the unlawfulness and unrest in Charlottesville. The states of Alabama, North Carolina, Maryland, San Francisco, Knoxville, City of Kansas City, already ban guns at demonstrations and protests on public property. These ordinances date back to a 14th century statute adopted by when the USA was formed and established, commonly referred to as going armed to the terror of the public. Several states imported the concept in some ways into their legal systems, including Massachusetts, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Virginia, New Jersey, and Connecticut. By the mid-19th century, more than 17 states had adopted some form of this common sense law. The Massachusetts statute, for example, barred residents from going out armed, quote, to the fear or terror of the good citizens of the Commonwealth. So to close, I want to read a quote from someone you might be surprised that I would read a quote from. This is a quote from the president of the National Rifle Association, who said, "I have never believed in the general practice of carrying weapons. I do not believe in the general promiscuous toting of guns. I think it should be sharply restricted and only under licenses." And that was from NRA President Carl Frederick in 1939. In 1967, then Governor Ronald Reagan, former president, stated, "There's no reason why on the street today a citizen should be carrying loaded weapons. Exceptions, I believe, must be made for members of law enforcement, retired and active, our extraordinary first responders, including those who serve in volunteer fire departments and EMS in town, who shouldn't have to stop for entering a public building or town property or open space, and members of the military, both active and retired, who are no longer serving. Why? Because they are trained. They are trained to be in stressful situations. There is plenty of training. Connecticut has among the stronger gun laws in the country in terms of permitting for concealed carry and in general. And those were put into place and strengthened after Sandy Hook. But I don't think we should be looking backwards. We should be looking forwards. We should be looking forward. How do we respond to Sergeant Van Ness and help clarify and strengthen the ordinance that in 1971 was just good, in 1981 was just good sense, and that seems to be good sense today, and where the research is clear. There were lots of comments at our last meeting that reference, in varying ways, research from a gentleman by the name of John Lott. John Lott is a researcher who works for an NRA-funded research organization, whose research has been broadly debunked 40 times over, including by 15 researchers from the National Institutes of Health and 24 other academic researchers. The data that's thrown around is anywhere from 96% to 98% of all mass shootings in our history have occurred in gun-free zones. It's simply false. When he did that research, and this is what the NRH, 15 of 16 NIH researchers said when reviewing his research, they said that his methodologies were wrong. He included in those, under his definition of mass shootings, things that happened in the home, where more than 3 people were killed, and nearly all of those were domestic violence situations. They weren't in public space. When you account for that, and this is where more than 24 other researchers have done work on this, and I'd be more than glad to share links as we continue to have these deliberations. That number is actually closer to 10%. Still too high, by the way. Still way too high. 10% of mass shootings in recorded history in the United States have taken place in gun-free public places. But that's a big difference. Still way too high, but still a big difference. The other piece of research that's really important, there's conversation a lot about the best solution to a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And when you look at the tragedy that happened in Texas recently with the church shooting, there was a lot of talk that said, see, a good guy with a gun stopped it. And yes, a good guy with a gun who had it in his home, where he, according to the Supreme Court, is legally allowed to have that gun. And in Texas has open carry, so can take it out of his home. But he wasn't in the church. He was in home. He heard what was happening, got his gun, and then went in. The FBI did research that looked at 160 active shooting situations in public spaces. In 3% of those, did a good guy with a gun prevent further death and destruction from the bad guy with a gun. And when they looked deeper into those numbers, that 3%, so that's 5 people, that 3% included 3 paid security guards, trained armed security guards, so they weren't regular average Joe citizens, included 2 off-duty police officers, again, trained to deal with that type of situation. And the final one was an active duty Marine. So there are rare instances on record of, in a public space, a good guy with a gun stopping a mass shooting. And part of that is training. There's plenty of training to learn how to use and fire a weapon that goes into getting a permit. You do it once, and I'm sure that my colleague Justin Betty will talk a little bit about his training as a real estate agent, or your training as a lawyer, and the professional development work you need to continue to do over time, every year, to continue training and to continue learning. It doesn't happen when you have to get your permit. But there is no training, except in the state of Delaware, and that's something I think both we here should look at. The state of Delaware requires specific training for using your firearm in a high-stress, criminal, violent situation. We don't have that in our state. So the research is abundantly clear that there isn't a greater sense of security. It's a false sense of security when you carry your gun into one of our town parks, to our ball fields, to our town hall, to our library, to our senior center, wherever it may be. It's a false sense of security that the data does not back up. And I hope when we get beyond the emotion of this on both sides of the issue, that we could talk and look at the facts and really, as a board, and we've done this our entire time, and we're all fortunate enough and grateful to everybody that we have a second term to work together, that we can have a real deliberative process as we go through this to consider the voices from our residents, but to look at the research and the data. We're not trying to do something new here. With that, I think we can reach a consensus on developing a sensible policy that protects the rights of peaceful assembly under the First Amendment and respects the right of gun owners protected under the Second Amendment. And I cede the floor, and I say thank you.
Okay, any, it's funny, it took longer to pass, shorter to pass the last 1019 than it did to hear from one selectman
So easy.
now. Anybody else would like to?
I think we would all have something we'd like to say.
George?
Firstly, I'd like to thank all the folks who took the time to speak at our meetings, and also thank those who attended these meetings in support of their views or just to hear both sides of the discussion. I'd also like to thank those who submitted emails on this subject. I believe the board received about 300 emails on this. Freedom of speech, our First Amendment, is a great thing, and we need to protect and encourage it. As I had to listen to what you all said for well into the late night, now you folks have to listen to what I think and what I say. So turnabout is fair play. First of all, I want to say I'm not against all gun laws, and I'm not in favor of all gun laws. I believe that there are some types of guns that shouldn't be legal, and there's some people that shouldn't be allowed to carry guns. I also believe that some of our existing laws could be improved without getting into specifics. I also realize that there are folks who favor any and all restrictions on guns with the long-term goal of outlawing them at some point. And I want to assure you that I'm not one of those people. If you look back in time, and I did a little research on this, gun laws have really mutated and evolved so many different ways over the years. They actually predate the Constitution, thus they predate the Second Amendment. The first gun laws in the colonies were intended to bar guns from slaves, indentured servants, American Indians, and Catholics. Seriously, I mean, I'm a Catholic, so I guess I wouldn't be allowed to carry a gun then. In the wake of our revolution, in response to fears that King George or some other despot would attack the homeland, laws were enacted to require all men between the age of 15 and 45 to keep a gun at the ready. This was our militia. In fact, laws were also enacted to allow military commanders to enter people's homes to inspect these mandatory firearms to ensure that they were actually in working order. After the Civil War, the KKK was formed to champion gun laws to prevent the freed slaves from acquiring them. I'm guessing that they probably succeeded to some extent. My point is that gun laws have always been driven by politics, reflecting popular sentiments of the time, and they evolve over time, driven by these forces. So, with that in mind, in considering the proposed ordinances, I listened with an open mind to what both sides had to say. In that process, I've attempted to sort the facts and actualities from the fiction and hyperbole. As a result, I've come to the following conclusions. 1, the statements I've heard by current and former law enforcement officers in public comment and in private conversation and in emails to the board are strongly against the proposed ordinances. Not one has expressed any support whatsoever for these ordinances. That's a fact, and it weighs heavily in my thinking. The record shows that those individuals, this is my second point, the record shows that those individuals licensed to carry are a class of citizens that are among the least likely to break the law. These folks are law-abiding and will obey these proposed ordinances if passed. Legal permit holders are not the folks that we need to worry about. Third point, based on what I've seen in the news, it's clear that we cannot depend on our police to protect us against every threat. They just can't get there in time. From the testimony we've heard, the average response time to a call is 8 minutes. A lot can happen in 8 minutes. As somebody recently told me, when seconds matter, the police are only minutes away. Potential predators, this is my fourth point, potential predators don't care about ordinances. As we've seen over and over again, these deranged individuals choose to carry out their attacks in places where guns are banned. They don't shoot up the local police station. They don't show up at an NRA meeting. They won't likely show up at a gathering of the CCDL group. They go to a school or a church, or maybe it's an entertainment venue. They go to places where they can wreak the maximum damage with the minimum risk of getting shot themselves. The bottom line is that our laws carry no weight with these individuals. Anyone who stands behind such ordinances in a public place is putting themselves and the public at risk. I just can't comprehend or understand the arguments put forth that such ordinances will provide a shield from gun violence. Point number 5. I'm clearly not in favor of creating soft target zones where deranged individuals have the opportunity to kill defenseless people without fear of getting shot themselves. Soft targets are a magnet for the evil or insane individuals who decide to kill. If we create a gun-free zone, it should be protected by armed guards and magnetometers on the entry doors. That's what we have at our state capitol building and in our courthouses. Point 6, finally, I'm not in favor of one town having different gun ordinances from other towns in the state. It's confusing and potentially unfair to those with a legal carry permit. Legal carry folks could unwittingly become felons just because they are unaware of a local ordinance. In conclusion, I cannot and will not support any new laws that create soft targets or free fire zones where folks can't protect themselves. Circling back to my earlier comments about how gun laws evolve as society changes, we're experiencing a marked increase in the number of depraved individuals seeking to kill innocents. This is a relatively recent phenomenon from what I can see. From a practical perspective, we can't simply eliminate all guns from our society. That's not going to happen under any scenario that we can invent or imagine. We are in a place where deranged individuals who want to kill innocents for a variety of reasons or for no reason at all often have access to guns. Looking at the grim reality that we now face, it's clearly not the time to further restrict our ability to defend ourselves from those wanting to harm us. Perhaps it's time to evolve our gun laws in a different direction, as they always have, in response to this new and disturbing normal. However, I don't see this as an issue that Southbury can deal with through local ordinances. It needs to be handled at the national and state level. The problem is much bigger than Southbury. I don't see how we can make it go away as a Board of Selectmen. Based on these reasons, I also advocate removing the curb on firearms from the pair of 1981 ordinances that now restrict them in the town open space and in town parks. I get the impression that these current ordinances were not thoroughly vetted at the time. The records are incomplete, a little bit vague, and they pass for reasons that are not clear to me today. Nobody on the current BOS was even aware that these laws were on the books until the new restrictions were suggested. I've spoken to one former Southbury cop who served in the period after 1981, currently retired, and he was never aware that these ordinances were on the books. For practical purposes, since so few were cognizant of these ordinances, they never really existed. Furthermore, the ordinance related to town open space is unreasonable simply by the fact that our open space is not posted with signs. It is generally unmarked. One could be standing in open space and not know it. On my home street, there are several small parcels of open space. They are not marked. Anyone walking through could legally carry a pistol or rifle through the various private properties and then unknowingly step onto open space and break the law. They become a criminal. It's an irrational ordinance. I advocate that we drop the wording in these ordinances that covers firearms, and I thank you for your patience and thanks for listening.
Thank you, sir. There, please. Selectman Betty, any?
Yeah, I'll weigh in a little bit. George mentioned that these mass shootings are a more recent phenomenon, and that's true. If you Google mass shootings, the 5 most lethal of all happened since 2005. And I think you could ask yourself, well, why is that? And in my opinion, you can draw a straight line to the fact that in 2004, the Brady Bill was allowed to expire. And it's put far more lethal weaponry into the hands of the average citizen. And I think he's also right that we're talking about some phenomena here that are outside of the ability of the town of Southbury to regulate. But that said, there are certain things that we need to keep in mind. I can count votes. I think I know where this is going to go. But one of the points I would make is that, as a realtor, we've heard a lot about how difficult it is to get a concealed carry permit. And from, the presentation we have, there's basically a 6-hour course. You take it once, and you're good for the rest of your life. To get my license that I use every day, it's over 60 hours of class to take your test, and it's an average of 7.5 hours per year to maintain it. Jason, what's the CE requirement for a legal license?
Up until this past year, there was none in the state of Connecticut. It's now 12 hours a year.
Yeah. And again, this is another phenomenon that's outside of our ability to regulate. But one of the points I would make is, I don't have a problem with concealed carry amongst the people I know that do it. They're responsible gun owners. They spend a lot of time at the range practicing, and I know that they're very careful. But to say that every single concealed carry permit holder does the same is simply not true. And until there's a continuing ed component attached to that, I'm not going to feel totally comfortable with these people carrying anywhere and everywhere that they're allowed to. That in mind, whenever we are faced with, I shouldn't say when some of us are faced with difficult issues, many of us will look to our faith. And we did get a letter from the pastor at Sacred Heart, the church I grew up in. And I'd like to read part of that into the record if I could. He said, in an atmosphere in which personal rights appear to be central to the case for gun possession and proliferation, I wish to call attention to the rights of the larger community called in my tradition the common good. A February 2016 study published in the American Journal of Medicine noted that Americans are 10 times more likely to be killed by guns than people living in any other developed nation. The study shows that the United States, which has the most per capita firearms in the world, suffers disproportionately from firearms compared with other high-income countries. The author of the study goes on to note, these results are consistent with the hypothesis that our firearms are killing us rather than protecting us. I strongly believe with my Catholic tradition that gun violence and the proliferation of weapons is a life issue, the life to which our American Declaration of Independence declares we have an inalienable right. The study to which I refer is one amongst many such professional studies that offer similar conclusions. They indicate that our nation and our town do not benefit from the current presence and number of weapons of violence in our homes, our town, and our nation. We are not a more secure and safe nation and town because of them. That is to say, they are clearly undermining the common good of our families, our town, and our nation. That's about all I have to say.
Thank you all for coming again and for all of your interest. My responsibility as a public servant is to listen to my constituency, collect facts, sort through opinions, and work with my fellow board members to ultimately come to a decision that best serves Southbury's needs. I know much anguish was expressed over outsider involvement, but I believe the information provided by organizations and non-residents on both sides was helpful to me. However, Southbury is a community that's based on camaraderie, human decency, and respect, and we don't take kindly to catcalls and verbal intimidation. So please refrain from that kind of behavior. In the state of Connecticut, we have an open carry law that allows permitted gun holders to bring their guns wherever legal. We are the legislative body of Southbury, and we've been asked to consider limiting that right. As evidenced by the need for this larger meeting venue both times, the possession of firearms is a highly sensitive issue, and I have and will continue to devote the due diligence and thoughtful prayer it deserves. What we have before us is two opposing views harboring fear. We have law-abiding citizens protected under the Second Amendment and the state constitution, fearful of the erosion of their rights and the inability to protect themselves and their families, and we have law-abiding citizens legally entitled to protection, fearing for their safety and infringement of their First Amendment right. Our resident sergeant reported that we do not currently have an issue of reckless abandon with firearms or any documented history of misfirings of guns. We do, however, live in a state with open carry laws in a community where many residents have registered guns. They have rifles, they have shotguns for various reasons, none of which are my business as long as the law is followed. Southbury crime statistics have never shown a flagrant gun concern, but we are now compelled to address an issue promulgated by fear. I interject that after September 11th, America was changed forever. Fear was instilled in homes where fear never existed. As a young mom at the time, I realized if I gave in to that fear, evil would win, and the quality of my life and that of my families would be forever changed. We might be less active, participative, and we might lose out on opportunities for my family to thrive. I chose not to give in to that fear, but rather my resolve to face evil got stronger. For the first time in my life, however, I knew what it was to be hated by people who didn't even know me. But as a result, I learned to live life as a kinder and more caring person, and now I humbly serve as a leader in our community, Southbury, where First and Second Amendment rights have coexisted since 1845 in a decent, respectful manner. I've read laws, culled through hundreds of emails, and I've listened to the statements made at our last meeting. If I rely solely on the voices of Southbury residents, I find we have a more than 3-to-1 ratio opposed to any ban to limit gun carry on town property. We have law on one side of the issue and concern on the other, but both sides harbor deep feelings on the matter. The decision of this board should not be an emotional decision. I reviewed the current pistol permit eligibility certificate application. There are medical, criminal, and dishonorable discharge questions, the responses to which are both vetted on the state and local levels. The process for obtaining a firearm relies on accuracy and thoroughness from the beginning of the process through the registration of specific weapons. The state has also implemented changes to law and limitations relating to clip size, ammunition, and so on. There has also been a loss of jobs in Connecticut because of gun manufacturers relocating to other states. It's not just Aetna and GE leaving Connecticut. We've heard a lot about soft targets and how criminals don't abide by laws, and we've heard that people were too intimidated to come to the high school and speak at our last meeting. But this building is a gun-free zone, so where will the fear of intimidation stop? How would making Town Hall a gun-free zone provide a fearless opportunity for all to carry on their business when, as we have seen repeatedly, our most sacred gun-free institutions, i.e. education, have been violated? I'd like to add that I take issue with those who have said publicly that Southbury folks didn't get the chance to speak on November 2nd. This board collectively listened for hours to those in attendance who stood up to have their opinions heard, and I personally have read hundreds of emails and responded to every one of them, with people expressing their opinions. We did not cut anyone off, and had folks remained standing to speak upon the closing of that meeting, a future opportunity for them to do so would have been provided. But that was not the case. We stayed until the last person standing had an opportunity to speak. The common ground for both sides of this issue should be anti-gun violence. For me, the question before us is not whether to take away or limit constitutional rights, but rather how do we help keep our law enforcement properly equipped and educated to prevent gun violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Selectman. Jason, would
Thanks.
you like?
A couple of things to say. I'll try not to be too repetitive. What we have before us are really two issues, and I view them as two separate and distinct matters. One is the Democratic Town Committee's request that we look into a gun ordinance banning guns from certain town properties and events. The other issue before us is this 1981 ordinance that exists. And my views on those two issues are not the same. So I'm going to start with the DTC request and then get into my thoughts on what this board should be doing in the future over the coming weeks or months as it relates to the 1981 ordinance that's on the books. So first off, I'd like to thank everyone who has participated in this process. You know, we've heard from a lot of folks. This first came to us, I believe, like October 6th. A bunch of people came to that meeting on both sides. A lot of people came out to the next meeting, so we couldn't have that meeting at Town Hall. And then, you know, the newspapers reported, you know, over 800 people or so came 2 weeks ago. And that night, we heard from folks for, you know, about 3 hours, I guess. And beyond that, we've received hundreds of emails. We've received letters. There's been letters to the editor, phone calls. There's been a lot of information on this, and it's now been covered in every paper in the state. I can assure everyone here that I've reviewed every word of every one of those things, every letter submitted to the editor, every email given to us, every article, every comment. And I don't take the decision that we make here tonight lightly, because I do believe it's our job to listen to our residents and be responsive to our residents. And I do believe we have listened to our residents. I agree with Selectman Naylor, I too am taken a little bit aback by some of the comments about how we haven't listened to Southbury residents, and we need to listen to more Southbury residents. Every opportunity has been made. The majority of people, and I can't emphasize this enough, the majority of people that spoke at our meeting 2 weeks ago were Southbury residents. That is a fact. It's in our minutes. That's who we listened to. Those are the majority of those people, and 3-1, those individuals told us they did not want this ordinance. We received hundreds of emails. Most of them were from out of town, but of the subset that were from town, there was a clear message to us as to where the Southbury residents that chose to reach out to us would like this where they would like this discussion to go, and that was in opposition to this effort. I believe it's important to mention, you know, what it is we're talking about here, because the role, it's been mentioned a little bit, but the role is very, very limited as to what we're talking about. A lot of the comments, I mean, hundreds of emails, all these comments are raising big constitutional issues, are raising national issues, are raising permit issues, access issues, the types of guns that people can get, how many guns you can own. Those all very well may be worthy issues of discussion, but not for this board. Those are issues that we have no control over, that are topics of debate at the state and national level. That's not something we can be talking about here, and my comments and my thought process on this are not driven by any of the comments we've heard on those items. You know, as a couple of people have mentioned, and Selectman Bertram mentioned, you know, certainly there can be certain restrictions on gun ownership, and certainly there is a gun violence problem in our country. It is a real problem, and I don't think that anyone here, whether you're supporting this ordinance or you're not, I don't think anyone here is saying that that's not an issue that needs to be addressed at some level. The question is, how do you address it, and is this proposal that's being presented to us in any way rationally related to addressing that issue? And in my mind, I can't get there, and I don't believe it is. But that doesn't mean that's not a worthy discussion for folks to have. I just don't believe it's something that we have control over. I believe it's our job to be responsive, to try and solve problems where they exist, to identify, to solve identifiable problems, and we also have an obligation to not place restrictions on our residents that are not, in our view, any way related to protecting the health and safety of our residents. And I understand people disagree that over whether this ordinance would protect the health and safety of our residents or not. But I don't believe, personally, that an ordinance banning guns from town property is any way related to that ultimate goal. So that's one reason why I do not believe this is something that we should proceed on further. Also, along those same lines, you know, I don't fear responsible law-abiding gun owners. I've been around responsible law-abiding gun owners my whole life. That's probably surprising since I grew up in Bridgeport, but I really grew up riding at a Western horse barn on 188 called High Lonesome Stables right up the road here from the high school, where, you know, I was around responsible law-abiding gun owners all the time. I'd go shooting with them, and, you know, I don't live in fear of them. And I go to a lot of town functions. Before I was on this body, and now I go to a lot of town meetings. I go to all of our events. And I go there with my children, and not once in the town of Southbury have I feared for myself or my family's safety being at any of these types of events. What I do fear, and I think it's what we all fear, and a lot of what we're hearing are the other folks. I do fear people, irresponsible people with guns, non-law-abiding people, who are going to go up and shoot up a building. And I can't get there to say putting a piece of paper on a door is going to stop that guy from doing anything. I just, to me, I can't get from A to Z on that concept. The other reason why I believe that this is a matter that I don't think we should proceed on further is I don't believe that there's a problem that's been identified that we're being asked to solve. Now, people have come forward and have indicated that they feel fear and intimidation as a result of folks carrying guns, and that infringes upon their First Amendment rights. And I respect that view. I've heard those comments, and I understand them, that they exist. But the problem I have is our trooper told us that this isn't a problem. There's never been a complaint to the Southbury Police Department about intimidation with a firearm at town hall or in town property. Nobody has identified a specific instance where this has happened. And, you know, I'm not sure that our job is to create problems where none exist. I don't believe that that there is a problem that's been identified that needs a solution. So I don't support the ordinance for that reason. But then also, as a subset of that, we talk about these constitutional issues. For me, this is not a constitutional debate. Because we don't get there. You know, the Constitution's up here. If I can't find a rational relationship between the ordinance being proposed and the health and safety of our residents, and if I can't find an identifiable problem that needs solving, then we don't have to get into a constitutional debate as to whether this ordinance is restricting rights or whether First Amendment rights are being violated or anything like that. That being said, I do not believe that this is a First Amendment issue. This is a Second Amendment issue. And I don't think we get there. I don't think we have to get there. But the First Amendment, you know, I won't read it to you, but I have a Constitution too. I got this one in 1999 when I worked for the United States Senate Committee on the Judiciary, and I've always had it. And the First Amendment restricts the government's ability to impede upon individuals, you know, rights to speech and free exercise and assembly. The town of Southbury isn't restricting, by not passing an ordinance, we're not impacting anyone's First Amendment rights, or by passing an ordinance. I don't see how this is a First Amendment issue. I don't believe it's related to the First Amendment in my mind. Also, just two more points. One, I think there's already laws on the books that protect against the fears that people have raised. If someone's being threatened or you know, has an issue with someone, I believe the police can help them, and there are laws available to them. And my last point is, I just don't think that there's a demand here in the town of Southbury for us to have this ordinance. I could be wrong about that, but based on my view of reading all the comments and listening to everybody and looking at the overwhelming majority of the people in the town of Southbury that have come out and spoken on this and asked and talked to us about this, I'm not seeing an overwhelming demand. Instead, what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing an overwhelming demand for us not to do this. So when you take that, I don't believe that there's an identifiable problem, and then you talk about how I don't believe it's rationally related to protecting the health and safety of our residents, and then we look at the fact that there's other statutes available, then, you know, if I can't get there on any of those issues, and if there's not an outpouring of demand to have something like this, I just don't believe that it's our job or our responsibility to be placing restrictions on the rights of our residents. I would like to mention, you know, Justin read the letter from Father Joe, and I respect that Father Joe wrote a letter. I respect that the rabbi wrote a letter. I have a tremendous amount of respect for both of these individuals. I'm a member of Sacred Heart, and I read those letters more times than I read the hundreds of emails that we received, because I think it's important for us to listen to our clergy and hear what they have to say, and I understand the points that Father Joe is making, and I think that those points can be addressed as part of a larger dialogue when you talk about the gun control debate, but not about anything that we here have control over. And I don't believe that this ordinance is needed at this time, and I don't think we should pursue it further. That's my position on the DTC request for an ordinance. The 1981 ordinance is something a little more nuanced, and it's something that does require further attention from this body, in my view. I've read the minutes from 1981, and at a public hearing that lasted 10 minutes, where about 10 people attended, the word firearms was added to this ordinance. The word firearms was not in the ordinance that was published in the newspaper leading up to the public hearing. The public hearing, the entire public hearing on all of the elements of the ordinance lasted only 10 minutes. So that leads me to believe that this was not a, one, there wasn't notice to the public beforehand. So, you know, to answer Mike's question about where was the outcry and whatnot, I don't think that it wasn't on the agenda for that meeting. And the fact that it was only discussed for 10 minutes, and they made other changes to the ordinance within that 10 minutes, leads me to believe that it probably wasn't much of a discussion. And I really think we need to get to the bottom of a couple of things with respect to that ordinance. And I know Betsy and Noreen put together a list of all the folks that were on those committees back in 1981. To the extent any of them are still in Southbury, I think we need to talk to them, see what they remember about the ordinance. The ordinance has an exclusion if you get a special permit. It's Sergeant Van Ness said, he doesn't know. Does that mean if you have a gun permit, that's a special permit? Like, what does that mean? We don't know what that means. So I think I think that ordinance requires further discussion, further research. We need to, one, get to the bottom of what it was intended to mean, what all these folks were doing at the time, what problem it was that they were trying to solve, what discussions there were. There weren't discussions that meeting, it was only 10 minutes, but there had to be, it had to come from somewhere. To one, understand the purpose, and then understand what's intended by the exclusion in it. And until we have a full understanding of what that ordinance means, I'm not sure that we can do anything about it. I mean, we need to first understand and then sort of decide where to go next. So that we can get back to some sort of regular order here, my suggestion on that regard is that over our next couple of meetings, that we not put that ordinance on our agenda, that we go back to town hall and have regular meetings and we not have that on our agenda, and that the first selectman provide us information during first selectman reports. And then, you know, we can schedule a meeting, you know, in the next month or two to then address what the next step should be to figure out what we want to do with that ordinance so we can get to some, you know, get back to our normal routine here. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. So I guess it's my turn. I want to thank all the people of Southbury and from out of town who came to this, to the last meeting for their civil, respectful behavior in what could have been a very bad situation. Everybody was very adamant about their side and what they want to do. And this really shows why people choose to live in Southbury and the civility of Southbury. And I just want to say to the citizens of Southbury, thank you for that. It was a difficult meeting to run, keep under control, and I hope everybody was happy with that. As far as the 1019 bill, talking with people, you can talk to them, but you have to understand it was about 35 years ago. I look forward to 35 years from now, what I'll, quite frankly, will remember what I said or didn't say or what I said to people here tonight. I'm hoping in 35 years at that age, I can remember verbatim, but I don't think, and that's why we're recording now. Also, I think that it's questionable whether it's even legal to publicize a public town meeting to pass an ordinance and then change the ordinance when you have the town meeting. I frankly think it's illegal. You can't do it. So the question of putting that firearm in there at the last minute, if it was not published, it could be determined that that's really not legal, wasn't legally passed on top of it. I'd like to read, I know we heard from some others, but I have an email here from Joe Ruggiero. He is the coordinator, CPOD coordinator, Knights of Columbus, Council 5066. As you know, in the state of emergency, the Knights of Columbus will be doing distribution of water and food and other things. And it reads, Dear Jeff, as you know, the members of the Knights of Columbus Council 5066 here in Southbury have been requested to and have consented to be responsible for managing the CPOD, Commodities Point of Distribution, operations during an emergency here in town. We recently had a meeting of the CPOD subcommittee just after our normal Council of Knights of Columbus meeting on October 10th, 2017, and a concern surfaced during the meeting. I was asked by the CPOD team to contact you to relay that concern. Recently, the local Democratic Town Committee requested that the Board of Selectmen consider creating a ban on all firearms on all town properties and in all town buildings. The concern that surfaced at our recent meeting is in reference to this proposed firearms ban. During a severe emergency when the CPOD has been activated by the LEPC, Local Emergency Planning Committee, and the Knights of Columbus members and additional volunteers are conducting distribution operations, the plan of record is to have local law enforcement present during the distribution operations. However, there is a concern that if local law enforcement is so overwhelmed during such an emergency and stretched thin as a result, would the recently passed proposed firearms ban would the recently proposed firearms ban prohibit or prevent the Knights of Columbus from engaging or hiring additional private armed security or similar assistance to help keep us safe during the emergency CPOD operations? As you know, the CPOD operations are to be conducted on town property on Community House Park and managed out of a town building at the Old Grange Hall. This is the nature of the concern, one of safety during the emergency. We would please ask that you and other members of the Board of Selectmen carefully consider the concern as you decide upon the merits of the proposed firearms ban. Thanks and regards, Joe Ruggiero. So, on that note, I want to talk a little bit about the concern from Town Hall. It's been expressed to me, not by everybody, but a number of people in Town Hall. What are you going to do if you pass this? And this is a gun-free zone. What about our safety? Quite frankly, at the downstairs in the probate court, they have bulletproof glass, security system, and you have to be rung in to come in. We deal with, from time to time, angry taxpayers, angry people, people who, it could even be an employee, you just don't know. And they're wondering about their safety and how we're going to address that. If you look at the hours of operation of Town Hall, it runs from 8 o'clock in the morning and with meetings till 9, 10 o'clock at night. Does that mean that we would have to hire 2 police officers to carry 2 shifts when Town Hall is open? Do we need to do the same for Park and Rec? And what kind of expense would that be? Then you get into, similar to the schools, we have our roving police officers, and they will come around and they will, you don't know where they're going to be, which school they're going to be in, and then the schools are closed and they're locked down, and in order to get in, you have to be buzzed in. So would that be a policy that we're going to have to do, where we have a police officer until Town Hall is, our buildings are in, our library is in, and then have someone at the door, one way in, one way out, and everybody who comes in, you buzz them in for security reasons for the people in Town Hall. So there are actually people who are concerned about their own security working in a gun-free zone. So that's a concern. We also have highway department to deal with. Would it be any different? Something I'd like to address here was a letter to the editor to clarify. It was in the Voices, and it's from Jennifer Tozaki. And in it, it says the decision to station police at a vigil held in Southbury after the protest in Charlottesville demonstrated that our police realized the need to be proactive. For point of clarification, that prayer vigil started out as a prayer vigil, and then it turned into, and I have the actual here, the actual suggested draft for consideration and input for that. And it was going to be a prayer vigil for the people of Charlottesville, and I think that was a great idea. We all care to come together and pray for those victims of any tragedy. But also slash says rally against white supremacy. And at that point, that's what attracts a problem. They have a right to do that. I was asked if I could supply a podium, a microphone, some chairs. The problem being that once it became a rally against white supremacy, as I explained to Selectman Rosen, if the white supremacists come in, I have to supply them with chairs, podium, whatever they need. because we had supplied to them, and he understood that. And there were people back and forth in the community about that. And I'll have an email from Reverend Jerry Smith, and I try not to get the clergy involved in all this. I've spoken with several folks in this conversation, most recently with Scott Nessel. Given the issues with town sanction and potential use of town hall property and what seems to be the politicalization of a program, and not to mention the use of term rally in the announcement, we recommend abandoning the plan. It has been negatively impacted as well by the tight time frame involved. So our police were there. It was a matter of any large crowd that would gather. We also have police officers who, in the community, who will be at the walk through the, it's not unusual to see them at the concerts on the green. So it wasn't anything special. It wasn't anything different. And quite frankly, our police officers like to mingle with the community. It's called community policing. There was a lot of people there. It wasn't, nobody was being harassed. So, also on these current gun laws, we have a lot of open space, that 1019 does address. And back then there was a lot of gun owners, a lot of shotgun hunting people. Quite frankly, back in 1981, I don't think there's as many people carrying guns with them as handguns as there is today. Most of it was hunters, and I think they were probably having a problem on all the open space. I think back then we had taken 750 acres. I don't forget what year that was exactly. And Southbury was on the road to having a lot of open space, which we enjoy. The problem being that some of the open space adjoins hunting properties. There's even open space and state-owned hunting areas that actually border Bend of the River. And quite frankly, even some of my own property, and I have had hunters, bow hunters, not realize where the boundaries are, and they're hunting on my property. And I understand, I don't get upset because I know that there's not big signs everywhere telling them, stop here, you can't go past here, and they're gentlemen about it and they apologize, and that's okay. So, and then we get into the point of people from out of town. I know we talk about the number of people from Southbury, and I beg to say that just because you're from out of town doesn't mean you don't count, because people do come from out of town to our town to do business. And they may come to our open space or to the state open space to hunt, and it does affect them. So there's some security concerns that we're also wondering about in town hall, and I have been asked about that. And I agree that when you look at the amount of people that have spoken against having an ordinance from Southbury, it's substantial. And I am not inclined to expand on a resolution on this. So, is there anybody else that'd like to speak?
I would on a few points. And thank everybody. This is what we're supposed to be doing. This is why we were elected. A couple of things, and I'm going to work backwards from as we went. Since you referenced the conversation, Jeff, that you and I had when I came to you with the idea for a Southbury Vigil for Charlottesville, and the title was exactly it. I have the suggested draft for agenda in front of me. It was Southbury Vigil for Charlottesville / Rally Against White Supremacy. You said to me in your office early that afternoon that the reason that the town couldn't sanction it, it couldn't be a town-sanctioned event, was that what if a white supremacist group came and asked to hold their own rally? And I said to you that you'd have to give them that permit, because in Charlottesville, it was the ACLU, a staunchest defender of our Constitution, who went to the court and said, oh no, we despise and disagree with everything that those folks stand for, but they have a First Amendment right to assemble. And they were the ones who went to court to give the white supremacist groups their First Amendment right to rally. And it was when those groups violated their permit right by bringing weapons that the police shut it down, all right? So I said to you, I didn't say I was good with that. I said to you, I disagreed. I didn't agree with that. I said it's your prerogative, but I did not agree with that because it would make my skin crawl and I would be right across from them holding signs, rallying against them. But I said to you that I didn't think that was a legitimate reason. So I wanted to clarify that. And it was that moment that really politicized things, quite frankly. A rally isn't a political thing. Who isn't against white supremacy? How is that political? Everyone should be against white supremacy. So I want to bring that up. A couple of other issues quickly. Regarding the concerns of cost and security at Town Hall. Absolutely, and at the library, and absolutely legitimate concern. So my question is, and we talked about it at our first meeting when it was first proposed, there are 6 communities within our region and hundreds around the country that have in place ordinances. People are living their lives. Nobody's getting arrested all the time. Responsible gun owners are living on. People who are against, everything's people are living their life. Have you reached out to Woodbridge, East Haven, any of the communities around us, and asked them, have they had buyer's remorse? How have they addressed that issue? I think that's worth, before we all agree, and Justin said it, the numbers here are tough. We get that. But again, I really don't think this is a political issue. This is common sense. And to Jason's point, maybe one of the reasons that meeting was so short was because it's a no-brainer. Because common sense, and now what they didn't have in 81 that they do have today, is the abundance of research is very clear that it is a public health issue, that it isn't just a public safety issue. The abundance of research is clear. This is just a piece of what I've been studying over the last 6 weeks, which I'm sure all you have too. So that's another part. But I think it's still worthwhile. Let's go to those communities around us in our town who live in Connecticut, who are our neighbors, right? Who might be coming to our community to shop, to eat, to do business. Let's find out how they've dealt with it before we just blow it off. And we shouldn't do that. When, again, this isn't a new idea. In 81, they already had this idea. So all we're trying to do is learn. And finally, to the point about hearing from Southbury residents. If the numbers are right, and we've all said it was somewhere around 300 emails we got from both residents and others, there were about, 80 or so people thereabouts who spoke at the meeting? I don't know what the exact number was.
Less than 70, but...
Okay, so let's say, so we're talking about, let's roundly say 400, all right? Let's be generous and say we heard from 400 people, residents and non-residents. We're talking about less than 1% of Southbury residents. We haven't heard from Southbury residents. We've had an hour and 13-minute discussion tonight, right? We had a 3-hour conversation 2 weeks ago, and we heard from the original meeting from a handful of people. We have not had a true deliberation as a town about this. This is the kind of issue, quite frankly, that I feel if we really want to hear from the town, let's sit down, draft an ordinance that we all think is reasonable, and put it to referendum. And let's really hear from our residents. Let's really hear from our residents. 1% at most is not enough time to hear. But I thank everybody for the comments. I think this is a very constructive dialogue.
Can I just comment on a couple of things?
Sure.
As to the whole public health safety issue, I don't think anyone disagreed that gun violence is an issue. I think I specifically said that was an issue. My point was the very, 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 very limited role that we have in what we're talking about. I can't get from passing that ordinance to protecting the health and safety of our residents. Two very, very different points. And as to that last point, as to hearing from Southbury residents, nothing is stopping us from hearing from Southbury residents. Southbury residents can reach out to us at any time. I think all 6 of us are actually pretty responsive to all of our residents' concerns. We listen, we respond to emails. I've actually gotten comments from people like, I've never, received responses to like, we got 300 emails, and I think we all responded to, I responded to as many of the Southbury ones as I could, and You know, that's rare in 2017. I think our board, regardless of where we are on this issue, obviously we have political differences, we have different opinion, different backgrounds, different views. I think the board has done well in listening to our residents. And we're not stopping our residents from coming and talking to us some more. I made this point last time when we were talking about the petition for a town meeting. Just because we're not going to have a town meeting doesn't stop residents from coming to our meetings and speaking in public comments, writing us letters, calling us, submitting letters to the editors. So there's every opportunity for residents to continue a dialogue with us if they choose to do so. And they've had the opportunity over the last few weeks. And, you know, it just so happens that of all of the people, you know, everyone knows this is going on. And we've heard from a lot of people. And it's over 3-1 Southbury residents that have contacted us opposed to this effort. As to the referendum idea, you know, I said before that, you know, perhaps I'm misjudging this. I don't see a demand for this from our town. What I'm hearing from people is that there's no demand for this. But if you're saying there's a demand and you want a referendum, we have a charter, and I would encourage these folks to utilize the charter, read it, utilize it, and you know, there's avenues there if the Board of Selectmen is not meeting your needs. Thank you.
I do want to say that I actually did reach out, and it was interesting that the city of Waterbury does not have a gun ordinance. And it's, you know, when we look at this, and some people from that city have said, frankly, in private conversations, you don't want one. But I did reach out to a few, and like I said, the city of Waterbury does not have a gun ordinance. They do not restrict concealed weapon carry. There's no signs on their town hall. So,
So what about the cities and towns that do, and that are closer in size to Southbury?
all I know is the city of Waterbury does not. Okay.
Have you reached out to the other towns? We discussed it. I mean,
Well, we can
I
very
feel like
easily
we're
look-
just- we
you can
just
very
wanna move
easily
on. I
look
get that.
online.
I get we just want to move on. All right, I get we just want to move on. But again, if are we truly giving this serious consideration? If we're not reaching out to the towns right around us, this is not new. 1981, the town decided to do this. Towns we're playing catch up now. I mean, we think we're pioneers. No, 1981, they were pioneers when they did that then. All right, now towns all over the country have done this. All right, of our size, of bigger sizes. And George made one point about law enforcement. You've made some points about law enforcement. If you go back and look, law enforcement, two of the largest law enforcement organizations in the country, the International Association of Police Chiefs, Major Cities Chiefs Association, the Smaller Towns Association hasn't put out a position, but they support similar restrictions, not exact restrictions like this. They support similar restrictions to open carry or concealed carry in certain sensitive areas. All right? So on a national level, law enforcement has spoken. On a local level, if you look at what happened, I think it was the evening of our meeting 2 weeks ago, the shooting in Walmart. There was a shooting in Walmart in Colorado. No, there was one in Colorado, though, I think that night. But in Colorado, some people commented on that, look, imagine if there were good guys with a gun there. Well, there were. There were 2 people in that Walmart who were legally carrying in Walmart. The police said it hindered their investigation and their work, and folks, the actual criminal got away initially because they didn't know who the good guy with the gun was and who the bad guy with the gun was. I'd urge you, as we reach out to local towns, speak to the chief of police in Woodbridge, for example. Find out what they think before we just say, oh, we've heard from 1% of the town, less. That's enough. I don't think we've given this serious enough consideration. It doesn't mean that I don't think we're all serious about it. But a few hours last week, we sit here like, oh, we were here 3 hours. Wow. That's our job. That's our job, to listen, and we've done a great job of listening. And I too, and I think most of us, to Southbury residents, I try to respond to every email thanking them for participating. But we have to treat this at the level it deserves. We can do things. It is our job to do things. Other municipalities around us and around the country have done things. And they've done it because of public safety and public health. And they've done it within the guidelines of the Constitution. So if if we decide not to move forward with the specific request in town parks and bans, and if down the road we review the 81 ordinance and ultimately it gets rescinded, then let's look at other things we can do to respond to the concerns from certain citizens who want to have an open right to their First Amendment right to peaceable assembly and feel that they can't. Other towns have done that. The city of Los Angeles is considering that right now. Prohibiting, this is what they're considering, prohibiting at public rallies that require a permit, right? That the city is requiring a permit for marches, parades, etc. They are considering not only an existing ban that exists already on having firearms at those events, but banning things like baseball bats and shields and signs made of things that are hard that can potentially be used as weapons. And we're not willing to have that talk. And I think we need to do more of it. This is not enough to me, and I thank you.
Well, I don't know about the chiefs of police who run under political pressure, but I've been involved with many friends and that are police officers, my own family, lived with police officers, hung with them, and I have yet to hear a boot on the ground police officer prefer to have another gun law in. The chiefs of police, the head of the Connecticut State Police, they'll all say very much what the administration wants. But when you get them quietly aside, I would say I've not heard one of them ever say about wanting another gun law.
I'd be curious to hear from the 6 chiefs in the towns that already have restrictions around us.
So,
We have 169 towns and municipalities in the state. So if there's 5 or 6 that have such ordinances, that's over 160 that do not. And I think the ratio is pretty one-sided.
I think, if I could just make one more comment about this 1981 deal. I respectfully, I need to disagree with the statement that was made, because we cannot call ourselves pioneers in this field because of the 1981 ordinance and then say 36 years later that 1% of the population, after all this publicity and everything, reaching out to us is not a lot of people. In 1981, 10 individuals, only one of which was a citizen of the, an unelected citizen. Everyone else were public officials at the public hearing. In 1981, 10, maybe it was 12, people showed up to a public hearing, had a 10-minute discussion, and someone threw the word firearms into something that was previously published. That is, I don't think we could call ourselves pioneers. I think we need to be careful in how much weight we give to what they did back then. That's why I think we need to have a fuller analysis of what happened and what was discussed and why it was discussed and talk to other people, because it's just surprising to me that it went the way it did. But if 10 people throwing firearms in during a 10-minute meeting with no analysis or discussion whatsoever are pioneers, well then listening to 100 Southbury residents 36 years later should give some weight. But, you know, at the end of the day, for me, I've outlined the various reasons why I don't think we should proceed, and I don't on that front, and I think we should move on.
okay.
Jeff, one quick question.
Yes, sir.
Our largest public gathering is not on town property. Do we know how the training school feels about people carrying?
I actually don't know, to be honest with you.
Let's look into it.
We can find out, yeah. Okay.
State property, so.
Southbury celebration.
State property, state parks certainly, they're not allowed.
I don't know.
So I don't know. That'd be interesting to find out.
We'll find out.
It's worth finding out.
Okay. We'll move on. As long as we're set.
No action to take.
Right. We'll move on. Any new business?
I do. I have one thing I'd like to discuss. Oh, wait. Do you want Arthur to, should
Can
let
we,
Arthur speak?
yeah.
Yeah.
Arthur, would you like to speak?
Can I make a motion to go back to item C on the agenda, Arthur O'Neill, update on state issues?
I'll second it.
Made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Well, you're on.
Thank you very much, and thank you for putting me on the agenda. I want to briefly give you a little bit of an update on the budget, but before I do that, I just wanted to mention something that I've been involved in that does have, I think, ultimately an impact in Connecticut and Southbury, and And Congress is now looking at something that we do in Connecticut, and that is having regulations be reviewed by the legislative branch, which in Washington would be Congress. And we've been doing that here in Connecticut for many years. And I actually was invited to go testify in front of the U.S. Senate's Committee on Homeland Security about them trying to go in that direction and create it. And for all the negative news that I'm going to be presenting and have been presenting to you about the situation in Connecticut, we are actually nationally recognized. The Speaker of the Idaho House of Representatives said that we are the model, the gold standard that to be followed by other states and the country, the state of Connecticut, for regulating the regulations process and having the elected officials, elected representatives of the people have some kind of say over how regulations get adopted by the bureaucracies. And we get regulations all the time in Connecticut that come from the feds, and Southbury gets regulations and environmental regulations and that sort of thing coming out of Washington. So they look like they might actually do something to copy something we're doing, because at least one thing we do, everybody seems to think we do it better than anyone else in the country. Now for the bad news. It's actually not as bad as at one time or another it looked. I have a couple of copies of something which I will leave with you that summarizes the financial effects of the budget that was adopted on October 26th and modified slightly yesterday in response to the governor's partial veto of the hospital tax feature and an effort to try to correct some technical problems, plus address the renters and elderly issue, which I know was of concern here in Southbury. And the first thing is, just to give you a rundown, in 2017, the pilot on state-owned property was $171,000 and change dollars. It's being reduced to $13,000 in this coming budget, the one we're in now, and in 19 it's going to zero. So that's a substantial reduction, obviously, from what we were getting. The Pequot Fund is also being reduced in the second year of the biennium, so that's a $37,000 loss in the second year, not this year. The town aid road grant is going to be maintained at $378,000 and change dollars. The education cost sharing, which is the biggest one, at $3.4 million last year, it's going to be reduced to $3,285,000, but in next year, 2019 fiscal year, is going to go up to $3,545,000. And so that's $172,000 this year, but then you're actually going to be ahead by $259,000. Like I said, I've got this data. I'll give you a couple of copies of this. There are grants for municipal projects. That looks like it's not going to change at all. That was only $20,000. Municipal revenue sharing account, that was a new program that was started a couple of years ago. That is being zeroed out, so that's $400,000 that you will not see, and nobody's going to be seeing that. And then finally, there is an item that wasn't had before, it didn't exist, was municipal stabilization grant of $273,000 in this coming fiscal year, the one we're in now, but that's reduced in the following fiscal year to $74,000. The net effect of all of these changes is that in the fiscal year that we're in now, this town is going to be seeing about $223,000 less than it did last year. And in the second year of the biennium, you'll be getting $77,000 less than last year. So the cuts will be partially restored. Now, one of the things we dealt with yesterday was this elderly and renters rebate program, which I believe Southbury, this was state money that was given to residents of Southbury to the tune of about $200,000 and change. That program was going to be administered by the town under the budget as it passed on the 26th of October. That has been changed. OPM will continue to do the administration. The program is being reduced in the terms of the total number of dollars, and the plan is that some of those dollars are going to be made up by the municipalities. There is a cap on the amount of the cut that you could experience of $250,000. So Southbury is probably not going to benefit from that cap. So that means whatever reduction is going to be done in OPM funding, Southbury is going to experience that reduction. And what they're going to do is all of those numbers I gave you, for example, let's say something like the pilot money or something, that might be reduced. Something is going to be reduced. OPM is going to do an as yet unspecified clawback of funds that are going to be given to municipalities to offset the $8.5 million reduction statewide of the program. So you will get less money than at least one or two of these line items show, but it will not be a huge amount less. It will be a proportionate reduction of that money that you were getting from the state, the town was getting, or the town's residents were getting from the state for that renters and elderly program. So I will leave these with you, and when we get new updated information based on what happened yesterday, because I don't have that updated data specific to the town of Southbury, I will provide that information. But basically, as of right now, Southbury, instead of being down millions, which was what the governor's executive order called for and his original budget called for, we're going to be looking at a couple of 100,000 in this fiscal year we're in now, and maybe less than 100,000 in the following fiscal year. So I don't know if there are any questions that I could try to answer. I know you've had a fairly lengthy meeting and dealing with a lot of difficult issues, and this one isn't really finally resolved. I will add one last thing. The same cautionary message that I've been bringing to you for probably a year now is that the state's finances are in a state of being almost catastrophic. We are looking at a $4 billion plus budget deficit in the next biennium, and the revenue numbers that we are seeing for income taxes and sales taxes are off from the projections of only a few weeks ago. So these numbers could conceivably change, although I think we will not see the kind of massive drastic changes that you were being told you might experience from the governor's budget or from the executive order. So I think at least through the end of this fiscal year, which is only about 8 more months, we are probably in pretty good shape. But this situation, the crisis, is nowhere near over, and we are still experiencing serious problems with our budget and trying to maintain a balanced budget. And this will inevitably have an impact in the municipalities across the state of Connecticut.
What's going on with the, if I may?
Yeah, sure.
What's going on with the teacher fund, the pension situation?
The teacher pensions are not being handed off to the towns. That was one of the things that the governor originally proposed. He stuck with it, but was not part of the final negotiation that the legislature did a budget. We had a very unusual circumstance. The governor really was not involved in the negotiations. The legislative leadership on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, Senate and House, got together and crafted a budget, and the governor really was outside that process for the most part. I wouldn't be surprised if this issue resurfaces in some form in the future, because a lot of states, in fact, do have municipalities pick up part of the teacher pension. The one change that was really made in the teacher pensions was that the amount of contribution teachers are called upon to make was increased by 1% from the 6 to a 7, and it's, I believe, slated to go up again, which still leaves Connecticut's teachers at a lower level of contribution than most teachers in the country that have pension programs.
Thank you.
But the towns are not being asked to come up with hundreds of millions of dollars to bail out the state's
Not yet.
obligation on teacher pensions.
Thanks, Darrell.
Hey, Arthur, thanks for all your updates. You do them so regularly, it feels like you're part of the board. But my question is on this SB 1019 that hit us last year. Is this going, well, I guess it was this year, but is this been refiled by anybody, Joan Hartley or anyone else? Is there no SB 1019 equivalent on the books?
No, there's no, right now, there's nothing. First of all, the legislature finally adjourned sine die. There is no legislature sitting in session, so your liberty and property
So we're
are somewhat
safe.
safer.
We're a little safer.
A little safer. It could conceivably be introduced next session in February. I think the fact that it was, I think, very heavily criticized and rejected indicates to me that it's not likely, but unfortunately, you just never know when something's going to come up. This thing was a bit of a surprise. It kind of came out of left field, and I thought it was just an effort to make a show of the flag, kind of to say I tried, and then it was taken very seriously by the Education Committee, which reported it out. So I wouldn't say that you could go to sleep on this. I certainly will be vigilant to make sure that it doesn't go any further than it did last time around, and hopefully not even as far as that. I think that this clearly was a mistake, you can't rule out anything from happening in the legislature. I mean, that old adage about no one's property or liberty are safe has unfortunately, 2 o'clock in the morning on any given day this legislature is meeting, anything can happen practically.
We're at risk.
Anybody else?
Now, just if we can get a copy of the spreadsheet, just so if we have questions down the road. But I appreciate that, Arthur. That was really.
I'll give them to.
Yeah, or email them to. Whatever's best.
Yeah, I can email. The one caveat I would say is that all of these numbers are going to change.
Yep.
But they're not going to change a lot.
It's nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Arthur, I want to say thank you. I mean, I know it's been difficult, both sides of the aisle. It's been a long, arduous time, and I know for what you're compensated for at 2 in the morning doesn't quite make it worth it, but I do appreciate the time you do spend up there and all our legislators at the state capitol. It is a lot of work. So I just want to just remind, I did email all three of our representatives, Eric Berthel, Arthur, and Dave Labriola, when I saw the renter's rebate and the, what's going on. This is quite a bit of money, and some of our most vulnerable people. So we'll be taking a look at that. And we also know at a Board of Finance, I think I'm done with, I'm okay here. I can give my selectmen's report.
Okay. Actually, we still have new business.
Yeah, which is my group.
Mike's got new business.
Yeah.
Oh, you have new business, okay. So, but with Arthur, we are talking with the Board of Finance to deal with this, and it's the low SIP money, if it opens up, we've pretty much been instructed to get it out.
Spend it.
So the office is working on that, so. Anyway, thank you, Arthur.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, sir.
New business.
So, and I hope we can keep this quick. And it's a good segue, actually. George mentioned SB 1019, and, earlier this year, we came together. It was a nonpartisan issue. It was a Democrat, actually, who was sponsoring this legislation. Jason and I got together and drafted a statement. We all reviewed it and approved it, got it out there. And we were doing it because the well-being of our residents was at risk. And we needed to be a voice and rally the community. There's that word again, rally. And rally the community and be a voice for the community with the folks up in Hartford. I feel that there's a similar situation going on right now. Now also having heard from Arthur, our residents are going to have some tough times coming up with what's going on at the local level, with more money coming out of their pocket for less services being provided by the state. And now the House tax reform bill just came out of the House of Representatives, and the discussed Senate version of the bill would devastate Southbury's residents, devastate our residents. All of Connecticut, by the way. It puts a target on the backs of Southbury residents at a time where they were already being put under pressure from the state economic issues. So what I'm wondering is, similar to how we spoke out as a unified board then, would we do the same thing now, in conjunction, frankly, with Arthur and Eric and David, and write to our national reps and say, you have to do something to protect our residents. We believe that the plan that just passed through the House and that the discussions that are being proposed in the Senate will directly hurt the people of Southbury, and it will. I don't think there's any question that it will. Some of the analysis that's come out, that there are two states senators that Senator Murphy and Blumenthal have talked about, would devastate not just Southbury residents, but all over the place. Is that something that we as a board would consider, again, putting forth, and I'd be more than glad to, again, work with any of you to draft something that simply calls on our representatives, because they still are our representatives, to do what they can to protect the best interest of our residents and our constituents who elected us. And if not, I certainly would encourage our constituents to write to our senators and our reps to fight a budget that will hurt Southbury. Plain and simple, hurt Southbury. So I don't know if anybody has any comments, or we could just move on.
I would just say that the representatives we have in Washington, none of them will vote to approve any of these budget bills. I'm not sure what a letter from Southbury is going to accomplish with those folks. They're already against it. I don't know, it just seems maybe not worth the effort.
I'll take the effort. It's really easy.
Anybody else? Okay.
Okay.
We're gonna move on? Okay. Again, I'll give you a short first selectmen's update. One of the good news is that the Pump Rock Bridge is just about, we're gonna do the final checkoff and inspection, and near as I can figure out, we're under budget on that, which is a good positive side. So that's a good, we're making out all right. We are gonna go out to bid for two more bridges, two more bridges to build, and I hope to get those accomplished too. So if we can have reports from liaisons, George?
Okay, the IT committee did not meet recently, so I have nothing to report there. Region 15 Space Needs had a meeting on Tuesday. I was out of town on a business trip. I missed it. I will try to get information and update you at the next meeting. I'm very interested in that whole process, but I don't have any news at this point to tell you on it. Road Study Committee, we did have a meeting. Jeff mentioned already the Pomperaug River Bridge being close to completion. Or is it completed, or is like...
We just have to do the final.
Yeah, it's close. Should be done by Thanksgiving. I have to give some congrats to Jeff on that one for keeping it in budget, because that was a struggle with the contractor we had in place. He wasn't very cooperative. We did have our iWorks review on the road quality back in October, not too long ago, and it was good news. The current rating of our roads going by remaining service life is 13.58. Back in 2014, it was 9.5, so that's a 43% improvement. That's pretty good. I asked John Cattell what he thought about it, and he gave it an 83 if he were grading. He said, you know, it's like a low B kind of thing. You're getting by, but you're not really, excellent. Still room for improvement. If you want to see where we're at, the handout I gave you on page 5, there's a bar graph that shows where the roads are with RSL. There's an awful lot of them now that are at the full 20 years. That's the max. One point I would make, though, is we're kind of running out of low-hanging fruit. So further gains beyond where we're at, the 13.6, are going to be difficult, because a lot of the easier roads have been repaired, and now we're into the more costly the mill and pave, the full reclaim process roads. So we're not going to see this kind of gain in this year, in 2 years. We'll maybe see some. But I think we're going to be at a point where, we're going to spend money, our $2 million or so a year, and we'll probably stay about where we're at. That's what I'm guessing. The committee strongly recommends that we do not cut our road budget. I know we're coming into budget season soon, so please keep that in mind. And they say that even if the state funding dries up in the future, it's a penny wise and pound foolish proposition to cut the road budget. I totally agree. As far as the road budget goes, there's $200,000 currently allotted for bridges And John and Jeff, I don't know, you're probably in the middle of all this, they feel that's a little low, plus there's money for guardrails, signage, which is estimated at $25,000, and I don't think that was even included in the budget. So what's going to happen is some of the road money will get switched off to those items, and we'll have a little less to spend on the roads unless we decide to increase the budget, which we have to talk about. As far as specific projects, Jeremy Swamp is nearing completion. There's about 500 feet left to pave. A few culverts need to be added, and John is expecting it'll be done by June of 2018. We're starting on Georges Hill Road, which has kind of been a sore spot project for a while. They're starting this year on some catch basins, but it won't really be till next spring where they can really start the full reclamation project. And by the way, it's running between North Georges Hill and Little Fox Lane. State funding, as Arthur mentioned, is in question. There's currently a $386,000 due from the state and what they call TAR money, which means Town Aid for Roads. Maybe that's come in, but John was a little concerned about it, don't know.
Didn't Arthur just say that, I think that was I think he left already, but didn't Arthur mention that the road aid was being maintained? I don't remember.
Well,
Maybe, yeah, I'm
currently owe us 386, and from what I heard at the meeting, it hasn't come in yet, so I don't know. The River Road Bridge, that's what Jeff was talking about, nearly complete. Next year, finally, we get to work on the Spruce Brook Road over Transylvania. Finally got approvals from all the government agencies. The Army Corps of Engineers was a big one. They delayed it for years, literally. Project is now going out to bid. We'll probably award bids in February. We expect it to be a 243-day project. There'll be an 80-20 split, the state DOT at 80, us at 20. Design costs will be paid for 100%. The total, our bill is $550,000. It's mainly just a big culvert. There's 5 existing pipes that are collapsing, and this is a project that's been going on for nearly 25 years. So it's finally underway officially.
The oldest bridge project in the state of
I was
Connecticut.
going to say, the history of bridges.
The following year, the East Flat Hill Bridge project is slated to begin. I don't have a lot of details on that. I think we've talked about it in meetings, though, in the past. It also came up as the River Road North from Silver Bridge to the dam. It just keeps sliding into the river slowly but surely. There's certain sections that need constant repair. Heavy rain is a concern. If this thing goes, if we want to fix it properly, it's like $5 to $10 million and probably end up in bonding. And it's not a lightly used road, apparently. Traffic studies have showed that there's a lot of tractor-trailer traffic and other traffic on it. What else was I going to mention? Oh, the streetscape lights. Yeah, that's an interesting one. If you're curious, we have a couple of sample lights installed near the pavilion or whatever they call that building, the bandstand on the green.
on the green.
Gazebo?
They're on Main Street south about 100 feet, maybe 200 feet east of the bandstand. So you can walk down there and see some lights. These lights were installed by USA LED. Didn't cost us anything. They're just samples to see if we like them. Another interesting little tidbit of information is the acorn-style lights we currently have apparently don't meet our current zoning regulations. In fact, I don't know if Noreen can find the lighting regulations quickly, and you can throw them up there, you'll see what I'm talking about, but there's actually a picture in the zoning regs of lights that you should not install, and there's one in there that looks exactly like the acorn lights. So it's a little interesting little side note there. There's also 2 lights installed from Vanguard. They've been in for 3 years. These are retrofit replacement bulbs only. They keep the globe fixture in place. And if you go to the pavilion, you will see those. They are brighter. One thing I will say about the USA LED lights is they are brighter on the sidewalk, significantly so. You can see it. However, there is a glare issue, and there's definitely an aesthetic issue. I've taken some friends out there just to look at them to get some casual comments, and they weren't really that positive. The good side of them is that it's probably the lowest cost way to fix the lights. I think We could probably, based on the financing that US LED is offering right now, and this is just in preliminary conversations, we could do the whole street in 1 year. We could pay for it all in one shot and finance it over a period of time. So that's an advantage, but I don't know. I'm not convinced that that's a look and style that people are going to like. RFPs are still going out. They've been delayed. We're going to get them out soon, though. So we'll have more options. We're going to talk to Philips. I'm not saying USA LED is the way to go. You know, it's out there under test, and that's it. So sorry it took so long. That's it for me.
Okay.
Thank you, George. As somebody who drives George's Hill almost every day, I'm very glad to hear that that's coming up. Economic development met last night. Biggest item of interest there is that November 25th, so the Saturday after Thanksgiving, our Shop Local campaign is going to be done in conjunction with the American Express Small Business Saturday. What this means is that the EDC will be having a passport contest. So they're going to have a booth set up at Le Bon's in the parking lot. They'll be handing out passports as well as Southbury shopping bags to anybody that wants one. They'll be there from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. The idea is that you visit as many of the over 24 local merchants that are participating as possible, and each of them will stamp your passport. The folks that have the most passports will be entered into a drawing to win a cash prize. So we hope as many Southbury residents as possible will get involved and spend their shopping dollars right here in town. One of the other interesting things that came up last night is that apparently there have been a number of people expressing interest in serving on the committee, which is basically full right now. So Chairwoman Armino had suggested that they might come to us and suggest that they get larger, that we add more people to it. Having taken a quick look at the charter, they are actually not full right now. They have 7 members and they have 2 alternates. They're allowed to have 3 alternates. So that's something I will relay to them. And but obviously it's nice to hear that people are interested in serving, particularly on that committee, which I think is important, an important committee for our town. IPOC has not met since our last meeting, and neither has the Energy Task Force.
I do want to say hats off to Vivian Temple and Ann Armino. They did a great job. It looks like a great.
Lots and lots of work went into making this happen,
Yeah,
so
that
please,
was,
please participate, folks.
I
It'll be
wish
fun.
they're here, but they did a great job.
You said the Le Bon's parking lot, the old Le Bon?
Yeah, the old Southbury Food Center parking lot. You won't be able to miss them. They're going to have a tent, and they'll be there that Saturday morning, so come on down.
Okay.
So LEPC was canceled yesterday. Library met before our last meeting, and I left my library folder in the car, but based on my memory. The big item that was discussed was the budget. They went through their budget for the next fiscal year. It's crazy to think that we are getting into budget season. And they approved their budget, which is being sent to the First Selectmen's office. I could give you the actual numbers, but I don't have it with me. But it was relatively flat. The Friends reported that they had a very successful donation day a few weeks ago, and what they're engaged in now is they have their holiday sale going on in the lobby of the library, so go check that out. And that's it.
Budget season is here. I haven't spent all the money yet.
That's great.
Fiscal year is not up yet.
Okay, so planning met on Tuesday night, and they're still reviewing the Southbury Training School report done by Malone and McBroom, so hopefully we'll get something final there. They're going to be updating the pedestrian safety plan and center plan as a prelude to the master POCD. And a public hearing for the new application for the 390 Roxbury Road apartment buildings has been set for December 12th. 2 buildings and 3 apartments each. And lastly, planning is reviewing draft sign ordinance. Commission for Senior Services met yesterday, and you all have a copy of Tamith's report and have learned that our senior center has a designation of focal points, area focal points, which is quite prestigious and will help us with future grant funding, which is wonderful. But the thing I really want to highlight about her report was the two areas of concern. The valuable resource of the Department of Aging has been done away with and disbanded, which greatly impacts our seniors and our senior center. And almost more importantly is a recent state budget cuts to the Medicare Savings Program. It's going to have a devastating effect on at least 621 residents in town who are going to be hit by the income limits being cut in half. So we need to be proactive for that as well, and to point out what you were talking about, Mike. Strategic Planning Task Force did not meet. I think everybody's getting a little tired with the regular meetings and losing a little bit of interest, so we're going to try to rev it up a little bit, and hopefully we'll get our grant, and then we'll get that community survey out there and really hear from Southbury as to what they want for the future. And lastly, Local Prevention Council met the end of October, but I just want to stress that they are still working very diligently for the federal grant, which is $125,000 to be paid out to us. And we're praying to God that we get it, because it really would help educate and prevention and on alcohol, tobacco, and other drug uses. It's important to stress that the communities that have received this grant have actual great success with the program, so we would, as a society, both Middlebury and Southbury, benefit from this this addiction that was existing in our town, and that is all I have.
I just want to say I did attend that meeting only because I was very concerned about these cuts and renters rebates. We are putting out on our Facebook and whatnot that there is prescription drug program through the town of Southbury with a card that may help. We're going to do whatever we can to help these people get through, but it is coming. The deficit at the state is coming. I do want to say I will be going with the chair of the commission. Tamith will be speaking at this event, and I've asked her to come to the December 7th meeting to give a presentation on what this means. I didn't want to do it. She asked if she could come tonight, and I said I just thought it would get lost in the event. So we'll have more. It's going to be a long meeting at the next meeting, just to warn you. We have a number of presentations that will be taken during that time. Mike.
Parks and Rec and EMS have not met since our last meeting. EMS meets on the 6th, and I've adjusted my schedule to be there. Parks and Rec is scheduled to meet the same evening as our Board of Selectmen meeting. So one of the things I would like us to try to do, I know dates are always hard, but you know, I've made a commitment. You guys saw my emails back and forth. Everybody read it in the paper. You know, I've spoken with my employer about adjusting my schedule so I can attend all those meetings, and I've sent the schedule of meetings. But I can't attend if it's unless our meeting's only 15 minutes long on the 7th, because they start at 7:15. So you know, I'd like to, when possible, try to at least encourage all of the commissions to try not to conflict with our meeting, at least with that one meeting that we have every other week, you know, every 2 weeks, so I can attend. And Region 15 was supposed to be Monday, but it got switched to Tuesday, and like George, I was away on business on Tuesday. So.
Okay.
I would just like to point out, Jason and I have had an off-the-record conversation about liaison positions and the responsibility of it. You want to address it? You're much more eloquent a speaker than I am.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about whether, and I don't know what the answer is, but whether it makes sense for us to be going to all of these meetings every month, or whether we should sort of maybe come up with a system where we prioritize certain like there's certain meetings where I know Jennifer goes to where you're just sitting there listening to the meeting, and then there's other meetings like the library board. I'm there, they like ask me questions and stuff. I'm actually part of the meeting, like, and I'm sure it's the same with the EDC or whatever. Like there's certain meetings that I think we actually are useful for, and there's probably other meetings that a lot of hours are being spent by certain of us. Not necessarily me, because LAPC gets canceled pretty much always. But I just wonder if it makes sense for us to go back and take a look at the chart decide which commissions perhaps make more sense to have regular representation, and then maybe do like something quarterly for others or whatever, so that it helps all of us with our schedules. It's just sort of the idea that we were talking about.
I don't want IPOC, though, I just,
I've had conversations, after that whole scenario went down, and I've spoken to members of the commission, Parks and Rec, but, and I speak to Geraldine, and EMS regularly about that committee. And I say just that. My schedule is challenging, and I work down in Stamford, so it's hard for me to get back at 4:30 every day. I said, but if there's a meeting that on the agenda is something you really need, that feedback, and we're not just flies on the wall, that we could read the minutes and read the reports and ask questions, then I'll be there. Give me 3 days' notice, and I can do that. So I think that is a good idea. And perhaps it's a conversation with the chairs of commissions, too, to sort of give that feedback, to let us, if there's a meeting that it's imperative, they really need the feedback from, the perspective at least of the board, I think that would be helpful in terms of time
well,
management.
it's just, we can
I
talk about
think
it.
you're right. I think we can discuss that. I want to say that this board, when I look around at the people serving on it, certainly everybody is very busy in their life. Young family on top of it, I recognize that. Been there, did that, and it's a lot of work, and still, continue on and do that. And it is a lot of service to the town of Southbury, all 6 members of this board. So I think we can talk about that. We can give it some thought for another discussion, and we'll look into it. I think we all want to be there, but we also have to balance a lot of other things, and I don't think much is going to get lost.
I think we want to be useful. And
Yes.
if certain people are just attending meetings just to sit there and listen, we have town staff that are in charge of certain areas. For instance, like planning and zoning, we have a land use director that can, provide reports or whatever. So there's certain meetings that we definitely, but at the same time, there may be a big application in town that we would want, more input on, and we'd want a presence there. So it's just like an example of
Right.
what I'm sort of talking about here, is whether it makes sense to sort of
And frankly-
prioritize and make sure we're using our time in a useful manner that's assisting the board and our residents.
And sometimes things come up at one of these meetings, and you may be the liaison, but I think it's also important that I go and listen as the first selectman to what's going on. And I don't want selectmen to think that I'm trying to take over that meeting or be there. I just want to listen or I have information to bring. So that's something that I'm trying to be careful of. But also, you're right. We have to. There's a lot of times there's information that can come through, and the other thing is sometimes if it's meetings that are not that, I don't want it to be a political scorecard. Okay, I'll say that publicly. Let's not make it a political scorecard. I know you're trying to adjust your schedule, and I know it's difficult, and I recognize that. So we'll talk about that more when we do our organizational, maybe, where we determine, so maybe somebody wants to get off IPOC and someone wants to get on, but maybe not.
Somebody wants to get on?
It is fascinating. It takes a little bit to sit there, but it is fascinating.
No, it's a
and,
very important
yeah,
committee.
it is.
It's up here.
Very.
Get it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other business?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Made and second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know why, but that was the most tiring meeting I've sat through here.
There you go, now handing this type over to you. Oh, hey.
Next Wednesday?